Hi, Maeve.
Hey, Alison. Hello.
Nice to see
Hi.
you.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. It's really great to make the connection with you and be able to share my experiences here in Vietnam.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. So you have a very interesting profile as many of my interviewees. So originally from Scotland, you're actually transformed into an Asian, to be honest, because you spent nearly most your life in Asia, nearly 24 years, including 10 years in Thailand and now close to 14 years in Vietnam.
Mhm.
And as I told you, I was particularly excited about this interview because I've been trying to talk to Vietnamese women riders for months because
Yeah,
Vietnam has a
yeah,
specific appeal to my heart. I'm a quarter
yeah.
Vietnamese. My grandfather was in Vietnam
Mhm.
and I traveled a bit there. And obviously, I love this country, and motorcycling there is quite impressive and beautiful too. So super excited to have you and for you to share a little bit
Mm.
more about this country. So my usual questions again as introduction is
Mm.
always what brought you to motorcycling in the first place. So what's your kickstarting motorcycle journey?
Um, well, I mean, sorry, just to give a little bit of a background information, I've actually got some motorbikes driving past my house at the moment. So you might hear that in office interview. So just a warning that you'll hear the sound of motorbikes, which I think is on point and specifically for people that are listening to this because they love motorbikes, right? So it might hear a little bit of distraction. But back to your question, I mean, I think it's an interesting one because, when I arrived in Hanoi in 1998, there wasn't really much form of independent transport in general, so there was very few cars, and the motorcycles that were available were limited and also very expensive. So, even if you perhaps didn't have a passion for motorbikes to begin with when you arrived in Hanoi as a foreigner, you had to learn to ride because there was no taxis, there was no, there wasn't, even car rental was very difficult because again, the price of the vehicles, because everything was imported. There was nothing manufactured in Vietnam at that time. So, we all had motorbikes, and at that time, the cheapest motorbike, but also the funnest was the Minsk, which was the Minsk from Belarusia. And that was classic Eastern Bloc technology. And it was also a very cheap working bike. So in the mountains, a lot of the motorbikes that were there were the Minsks, right? Because they were farming bikes, they were very strong bikes. They used to call them a steel buffalo. So, again, sort of arriving in Vietnam, it's like the choice of motorbike for foreigners was the Minsk because the scooter, the Honda Dream, which I think was released in 1997, was $2,000 or $3,000 at that time because it was imported. And for most Vietnamese, it was absolutely 100% unaffordable. So the Minsk was cheap. It was pretty dirty. It's a two-stroke, but super fun to ride and super strong. So it's a 125 two-stroke, which was great for the mountains. So again, because it was a choice for farmers and people in the north, all the mechanics knew how to fix them. So, so I think it was sort of, I shouldn't say by default, because not everyone was going on these kind of semi-hard to ride, not very reliable motorbikes in the north of Vietnam. But that was what we loved to do, was explore the mountains and do a lot of off-road riding. So yeah, I mean, I think for me, I did always have interest in motorbikes, but then that became an absolute passion and obsession. Yeah.
And so basically you started motorcycling, I would say, more out of necessity, transportation, coming into Vietnam, and then it became a passion. So that leads me to the questions. What is your assessment of the situation of women and motorcycling in Vietnam? So in Asia, we know quite a lot of women ride rather small bikes, exactly
Yes.
like how
Yeah.
you started as a transportation. Can you
Yeah.
give us a little bit of overview of women and motorcycling in general in Vietnam?
Yeah. I think there was definitely a niche here, but I certainly think for Vietnamese women with the larger bikes, it's not really a trend yet, because a lot of women here are, maybe they don't feel comfortable handling a larger bike. Also, the price for larger bikes here is still pretty expensive, because again, a lot of them are imported. So I think for the average person, you either have to be quite wealthy, or you're privileged, right? But there is definitely a growing niche. For the average Vietnamese woman, they're pretty happy being on a scooter, on a Nouveau, on a Nouveau, or even a Wave, yeah. And then they're hitting the mountains, because Vietnamese people, they grew up on motorbikes. You see them photographs here of babies on bikes. I mean, they are pretty good riders, and they're pretty fine doing multiple day trips with a backpack strapped to the, on a scooter, right? They're pretty happy with that, on a 150cc or something like that. But then the progression from that onto larger bikes, it is happening for sure, but it's still a minor percentage of people that are doing it. I've got an Enfield here, and certainly I haven't seen any Vietnamese women on an Enfield, but they're big, bulky, heavy bikes, so they're not really super happy and comfortable driving them. So yeah. So I think it's changing, but it is slowly. I think for the next generation, it will definitely be more of an interest. Yeah.
So it's not so much barrier, it's not so much social barriers per se, of women not interested, or society not seeing, from a good eye, women riding big bikes. It's more a question of affordability and physicality as well. So maybe a little fear of being on big bikes because it's not that common, but mainly affordability.
Absolutely. There's no stigma, I think, whatsoever, nor is there that much sexism, I don't think. The only thing is that most Vietnamese women, well, I'm talking very traditionally, by the time they're kind of mid-late 20s, they may start thinking about marriage and starting a family. So they don't really want to risk any kind of issue. Yeah. So that could be something. It's more caution, right?
Yeah.
But
so how do people react when they see you? So you ride quite a lot, you travel extensively around Vietnam. We'll talk about that a bit later. But how do people react usually, or when you meet a Vietnamese woman or men, or when you're on the road, how do people react? What questions do they ask you?
I've got an Enfield, and I've got a Bullet, and that's obviously a beautiful classic bike, and people will drive by and give you a thumbs up, mostly kind of middle-aged men, so it's kind of funny, but they'll give you a thumbs up, and they're like, it's cool, they like it, they appreciate it, but there's no certainly never any frown. I do remember the Minsk in Hanoi, when we used to drive and stop at traffic lights. People didn't like it because they're two-stroke, right? So that you've got a family behind you on their Honda Dream with four people, so two kids usually, and they're breathing in all the two-stroke smoke. So I get that. They were like, oh God, go away. But with the Enfield or other bikes, they're kind of like, well, it's cool. It's cool. Yeah.
So tell me, I already asked you these questions, but I wanted to share it with others as well. What made you come, but most importantly, what made you stay in Vietnam?
Yeah, so I came, actually, my father had a friend who was a journalist working in Hanoi. So I arrived in May 98. And then I just fell in love with Vietnam and basically stayed. So I haven't, I live throughout the year in Vietnam. So maybe I go on vacation for a few weeks per year abroad. But I'm here throughout. But so I guess I just fell in love with Vietnamese people, the landscape, and bear in mind, when I arrived, late 90s, Vietnam had just sort of recently come out of the embargo with the US. It was lifted in 94. Actually, no, it had been lifted earlier, but 94 was a year called Do Moi, which was reform, right? So reforming, economic reform. So the country was opening up to investments. It was a lot easier for people to travel around the country. It wasn't so restricted in terms of visas, etc., etc., etc. So we kind of, I mean, we didn't really sort of think of ourselves as, oh, we're pioneers and we're here to sort of like, you know, this is amazing. We just went with it, right? Because that's what back, you know, when there was not so much a cliche or a niche or internet to sort of think of yourself as doing something really cool. You just did it because that was, you were living in a great place and you had the passion for it. But for me, you know, those motorbike trips, especially in the early years in the north of Vietnam, in say Ha Giang, Ca Bang, Lai Châu, I mean, even Sapa, I mean, we were probably the first foreigners along a lot of those roads. And me also having driven early on in those, when I first arrived, probably one of the first female drivers in some of those roads, you know, it was extraordinary. You'd meet people, hill tribes who had never seen a foreigner before, and they were like, wow, they were like, whoa. So yeah, it was really interesting from a kind of personal perspective, but also the landscape in northern Vietnam is quite, you know, known worldwide for motorcycle riders, but also the hill tribes still wear a lot of their traditional dress. You know? They still do even now. So the markets, the hill tribe markets, the mountain road where you drive along on your bike and you'd be on this great mountain track path, small rubble road, and you'd see the red Zao or Hong in their full costume.
You can also speak, I just had a question because we were talking about the hill tribe. So I know that you speak fluently Vietnamese, which is which I find
maybe
quite
not
extraordinary.
I'm okay, but certainly not fluent, but
but at least you can express yourself, have conversation in Vietnamese, which I find quite extraordinary because, you know, I've been living for years in Malaysia. I still don't speak Bahasa. So I'm very admirative of people who pick up local languages, even especially when they're so different. But anyway, so I know you speak Vietnamese, but that made me think of the Hill tribe. I guess they speak, like, were you able to actually interact with them and talk to them and so on, or the language is too different? And
not always. The women generally couldn't speak Vietnamese. The men could, but basic. But it was enough to have a conversation. You know, a lot of the hill tribes are very shy, especially the Hmong. They're very shy. But you know, there was still some incredible experiences in staying at some people's houses. But saying that, you know, in the early days, we couldn't stay in a lot of villages. We couldn't stay in a lot of towns because they needed to have foreign permits. So sometimes you'd arrive in a town after driving all day. I mean, sometimes it would take us a full day to drive 40 kilometers. The roads were that bad, and you'd ride completely exhausted, and you couldn't stay in the town because they didn't have the permit for the foreigners, and they were very cautious of foreigners. So then you had to get back on the bike in the dark and drive again to find somewhere to sleep, because it wasn't always that you could just stay somewhere. Like now, it's completely open, but then it was very restrictive, so it wasn't just easy, nice hotel, something like that. It was pretty restrictive, so
so that leads me to the other topic of traveling in Vietnam. And so as you mentioned, you have had a long career in tourism, and you've also traveled yourself as a passionate motorcycle riders with group of friends traveling. So actually I have two questions. The first one is, can you tell us a little bit about traveling in Vietnam? So you were talking about the Hill tribe. Is it still possible to go to do some rural tourism, to have a little bit like out of the beaten track tourism in Vietnam? Is it still possible? Can you tell us a little bit about the motorcycle travel in Vietnam? And then a little bit related, I was curious to know, who do you usually travel with? Vietnamese, men, foreigners. So if you can tell us a little bit.
Yeah. I think, you know, there's a few. I mean, the north of Vietnam is again, it's famous worldwide as a beautiful motorcycling destination. You might have heard of Ha Giang, which is due north of Hanoi. It's quite on the trodden path now, certainly for motorcyclists, both for Vietnamese and for foreigners. But I think you know, people with especially people that kind of bit more savvy and are more experienced in terms of navigation can get off the main roads, so get away from the sort of touristy areas and do some sort of do some alternative roads within the main destination, say Kazan province. Yeah. So that I think is one tip to recommend to people thinking about coming here. It's such a huge country. I mean, I've traveled a lot in the north, but I certainly haven't seen all the areas. But Kalbam, Laicho is other equally as beautiful destinations, and it would take you months and months of travel to get to know that area. It's a vast area, yeah. But I think most people, when they come over here for motorbike trips, they might do sort of 8-10 day trips sort of thing in one area. Another popular route that people do, and that's more for gap year students or backpackers, they do north to south. Usually they'll come to Hanoi, they'll buy a motorbike, and then they'll travel down the Ho Chi Minh Highway to Saigon. I mean, that's just an absolutely incredible road because there's not much traffic. It's a very mountainous road, and the road condition is extremely well paved because it's a new highway, actually, the Ho Chi Minh Highway. So the scenery is amazing. And when people do that ride, they might do it over a month, and that's sort of quite a well-known experience for backpackers coming to Vietnam. And then typically when they get to Saigon, they sell the motorbike, and they can sell it for the same price they bought it for. So it actually, you know, it's quite a good way of planning travel here in the country. So it depends, I guess, how much time people have and really where they want to visit. One thing that I do always recommend is to plan the season, because if you come in winter in the north of Vietnam, it's quite terrible because it's quite misty, it's quite rainy, it's quite cold. And then on the flip side, if you plan it during the rice season, so that's between March, April through to September, beginning of October, it's some of the most magical landscapes you can see in the whole of Asia. So planning during the rice season, I think, is absolutely critical because that's, you know, it's the rice terraces, yeah. But also if you come in March, April, it's the hill tribes are out in the fields because they're planting the rice. And then in September, October is when they're cutting the rice. So you get to see a lot more hill tribe people out in the fields. And it's absolutely stunning. So I think planning the period is really, really important. You can have a very different experience in, say, Hazang in January than you would in September. So we call the rice cutting season, so that's September, beginning of October, is like the glory period. It's absolutely beautiful, autumn, right? So I think it's really important to plan your destination, look at the weather, and then do some research. I do recommend a great website called Vietnam Coracle. There's an English guy here called Tom. He does, I don't know how many recommended motorbike routes that he'd have on his website, but say, I don't know, scores of them. And that's not just the north, but also the Central Highlands, the Ho Chi Minh Highway. He's got absolutely up-to-date, but also bold, solid information. So I think anyone planning a motorbike trip here should absolutely go and have a look at his website for advice.
Yeah. Okay, I'll definitely share the link. So you were saying as well, yeah, that it's a little bit more open. So do you have this type of programs where you can actually stay with a Vietnamese family? So I know in some countries like Nepal, for example, Myanmar, not so much, but Nepal or even in India, or they had such a program as well in Malaysia, but it does not work so well. This, yeah, homestay where you can, yeah, actually stay with a local family for 1-2 days and actually, you know, experience their lifestyle and so on. So I'm wondering, does it exist in Vietnam, and is it still, how to say, real? Because, you know, sometimes when it becomes too common, then it becomes like a right? So yeah, I think it is in Vietnam.
Yeah, no, good question. I think so. You know, again, the beauty of the north is the hill tribes, and there is homestays we can say in a still house, which is just such a beautiful experience. So there is a huge amount of homestays, I guess you can call them. Sometimes it's just remote villages and you just stay in someone's house. I don't know if they really call it homestay or anything like that, but it can be difficult to find information about where they're located. But I think Tom's website, so again, Vietnam Oracle, is a good resource. But yeah, I guess nowadays these websites on homestays throughout the country, they're not everywhere, but because tourism is not so developed, say, compared to northern Thailand, they would probably be quite authentic. So, and it's a beautiful thing to arrive stay in a wooden stilt house looking onto a rice field. I mean, it's fantastic, right?
Yeah, I bet. So the other part of my questions were, so I know that you're you like having solo trips and you like traveling on your own and so on, but or at least sometimes small groups. So who do you usually travel with, or who would you like to travel with?
Yeah, I mean, I've got friends who have been riding for same kind of decades here, same as I have. So usually go with some close friends. I don't like driving in big groups. I think maximum would be 5. I remember years ago when we used to sort of drive 250 kilometers per day, which is difficult here, yeah, because of the road conditions. You're averaging sort of 40, 50 kilometers, or probably actually 35, including stops, 35 kilometers per hour. But, back years ago, we used to just drive all day and then your body gets so sore. But now we sort of do about average of 150 k's per day and just more cruisy, taking the landscape more, I think. But yeah, it's usually sort of groups of friends that I've traveled with in the past or know quite well. I'm not super great with riding rather with people I don't know so well, because I think that, I don't know, it's just, it can be open to issues, or they don't know how to fix the bike or something like that. So yeah, it depends where I am. Because now I'm living in central Vietnam. I'm actually living in Hoi An, but I spent most of my time here in the north in Hanoi. So I've got a new group of friends here, and they know extensively the Ho Chi Minh Highway area, the mountains behind west of Hoi An. Yeah? And there's just an incredible amounts of beautiful roads. So I'm learning to drive with new people since I've arrived in Hoi An 7 months ago. So that's definitely enjoyable. Yeah. So that was I think alone I do some trips, and I can do a few days, but I certainly don't like to go out for like weeks by myself. I think I need company.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, but finding one's crowd can be challenging sometimes. You can find people who are excellent riders, but you don't like their riding style. And because here there are 2 aspects. There is the riding style and skills and capacity, but then there's also traveling with people, which is a different thing. So you can love riding with people being on the road, but once you stop at a place, or once you need to visit, things have completely different taste. And on the other side, you might love traveling with somebody, but they don't know how to ride. It's super dangerous to ride with them. So
I think that's a really good point. Yeah, one I will mention that Vietnamese roads are quite I don't know if it's famous, but the riding style here can be very different from what foreigners are used to, and the Vietnamese can often in villages just pull out onto the road. So they'll pull out from their village, home, track, smaller road, and it's constant. So people will always pull out in front of you. And the Vietnamese, they know how to drive like that, and they just swerve around them. But foreigners will often brake, and then there's quite a lot of accidents. So I think, people have to be aware that when they do drive here, you really got to take it slowly. You can't burn through villages at 80 kilometers per hour. It's really dangerous for yourself and for the local. And you don't want to hit a local. I mean, you don't want to hit a local in any country that you don't speak the language, you don't understand the culture. But you really got to slow it down here. And I think that's a mistake of many foreigners. And, I've got friends here that have been driving for many, many years, and they just burn through towns and villages at like 70, 80, 90 k's an hour. And I'm a good driver. Yeah, you're an you're an excellent driver, but it's not you. It's not you. It's someone else that can just pull out in front of you, and then you're in deep trouble. Yeah. So I think that that's an important point, you know. And I do drive with friends here, and they do have quite big egos, and you know, they're guys on 400-500cc dirt bikes, and they like to go really fast. And that's great for them, but I will always have a bit more caution in my approach. Yeah.
And yeah, so you mainly ride with foreigners or more like with Vietnamese motorcyclists? So
yeah, both,
not with
both.
many women.
No, say that again. I just the connection lost for a second there.
I said I understand.
Oh, with other women.
I said I understand you don't ride with many women. There are not too many women riding big bikes, but in the guys you ride with, are they more Vietnamese or foreigners?
Yeah, mixed. I think, I mean, again, I think because I know the North quite well, there's a lot of really, really good young Vietnamese drivers. I mean, again, Vietnamese people, they grow up on bikes and baby, they, you know, first mode of transport's on the back of the bike with it in their mother's arms, right? But there's some really, really talented off-road Vietnamese drivers. And if you do a search on the internet for some off-road driving here that the Vietnamese do, I mean, they're really high level, but I don't think that's known at an international level yet. But yeah, no, back to your question, I do have a few female friends here who've got bikes similar to mine, dirt bikes or the Enfield. There is some, yeah, but not all over the country as much as I would like. But
so yeah. Do you have any motorcycling dream or wish for your motorcycling environment as a woman?
Yeah, sorry, can you ask the question again? Again, the connection went a little bit.
I was asking if you have any motorcycling dream or wish for you as a motorcyclist, as a female motorcyclist.
I think I have a few. I have sort of like bigger dreams, which I'm, you know, obviously due to COVID at the moment, it's probably not realistic. I drove a bike across the Pamir Mountains, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, and I think I'd like to go back to Kyrgyzstan and spend a good month there over summer, because I think that's one of the most incredible countries to ride in due to multiple reasons. I mean, it's just extraordinary. The people, the food, the landscapes. It felt like a very safe country as well for a female. So I would like to travel more in Central Asia, Pakistan, and then Iran. We were talking about Iran on a previous call. So that those three destinations are really intriguing to me. But then I'm also inspired by worldwide motorbike journeys. I listen to Adventure Rider Radio. That's quite a good podcast about motorcycling around the world. And, you know, people, it's so inspiring that people can spend years on a motorbike traveling and just affordable, not sure about some borders to cross are super expensive for sure, but I think that that's something that I would love to do in the next few years. Again, COVID dependent, so I'm not really sure what's going to happen, but they're sort of the bigger dreams that I would have for motorcycling outside of Vietnam.
Nice, beautiful. And within Vietnam, do you have do you have any best memory to share of one of your trips in Vietnam, motorcycle trips in Vietnam?
I think what was interesting, sort of again going back to the late 90s, was we used to use a lot of the old French maps, you know, because there was no maps for Vietnam, or the army maps. So that was always fun as hell when you'd see a mountain on the map, and we'd always look at the contours, and that's a high mountain. Okay, let's go there and look at the contours, and then you'd find a road. It was often actually an old French road, because you know the old French roads because they'd be paved with large rocks, which could be good and bad in the muddy wet, but good because you weren't always driving on rocks, rubble rather. So I think that was kind of a fun and kind of a very rather interesting memory to have from those times. But just, yeah, so many memories of beautiful mountain passes. I do remember though really hard riding, like really, really hard riding, where again, sort of some days you do 30, 40 kilometers in a whole day because it was such difficult terrain. It was difficult riding. And then at the early 2000s, the government started to build roads everywhere. So part of the Domoi, so again, the kind of renovation of Vietnam, as they called it, was to build roads to every single commune. So commune being a hamlet or a village, or so there was a lot of the villages at that time were cut off, and then suddenly boom, the economic and also government support to boost the economy here in Vietnam. So they were building roads everywhere. So it went from few roads to many roads. So we sort of got caught up in that, in the sense that there was so much construction everywhere. So you just get to something like, oh God, 3 days of mud and whatever, So I think that was also part of the memory out of the landscape of having those very witnessing rather the rapid changing of a developing country.
Well, I understand even better now why you are aspiring to travel the world to more remote locations, and where you feel like you're a pioneer or discovering roads or being off the beaten track. Because if your best memories of in Vietnam, now you need to go out and explore new lands.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I always make it a point, I guess, because I lived in Asia for so long, but I always go to my holiday destinations are always somewhere completely different. I was lucky enough to spend a month in Syria in 2010, so just before the revolution, the changes there. And then a few years ago, I went to Senegal. So I like to take myself completely away out of my comfort zone to somewhere very different from here, because I'm so lucky to live in such a beautiful country. It's like, where can I go that's so different? So yeah, I guess the quest for the adventure always continues.
And the riding challenge. Huh?
Yeah, without sounding too cliche with that, but you're always looking for sort of like a great adventure, right?
Yeah, completely. Yeah. And but we're talking about physical, riding challenge as well, and you were talking about these off-road, and that reminds me of a video that I've seen, the rural woman in Vietnam riding in this video has been like shared many times, and every time I watch it, and I'm always like so impressed, because you see those women with the bikes, like they have so many bags, huge, there are 3, 4 on the back, and they go through the mountains to the rice field and so on, with like crazy roads, and they maneuver, and the technique is amazing, really. So you're like, oh, they have a lot to teach us, like in terms of riding skills. Sometimes you're like, that's proper off-road there. It's really impressive.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you see in the north, people come up for motorbike tourism, and they're all completely kitted up from head to toe, and they're like struggling along these roads. And then a 60-year-old lady coming back from the market with 2 pigs on the back just like zooms past them. It's just like, it's great. It's part of the amazing experience of riding here. So
yeah, definitely. Yeah, and as I told you, I mean, some of the destinations, at least Iran, is definitely on the map to organize a women trips there, small groups of women's trips there.
Absolutely.
Hopefully 22. So yeah, I'll definitely keep you in touch when we have that, because I see more and more women like interested and willing to do that. But sometimes you want to have this feeling on being on your own, but you don't necessarily feel like being on your own, because sharing it with a few like-minded people also add to the experience, being able to share it with others. And so
yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So, I'd like to finish this interview with a last question as well, that I really like to ask as a closing question. If you were to talk to a Vietnamese woman who are interested in motorcycling, but for whatever reason they don't dare, or what advices would you give to women interested in motorcycling in Vietnam?
I think, yeah, I mean, firstly, again, sort of taking safety into mind would be just start on a bike that they're comfortable with, a bike that they're comfortable maneuvering and handling, and also comfortable driving multiple days. And then, yeah, again, sort of, I guess, key factors, which is relevant for anywhere all over the world, is don't overdo it. I mean, I think when people get exhausted, they have accidents because your concentration is low, right? But then also, you know, pick an area where you're not having to, you know, I think it's the same for all of us. We look at a country and we want to go everywhere, right? So I think it's be realistic about which areas to choose to visit. And then also my key point earlier about the weather, make sure you choose it during the right time of year. So I think it's sort of, those would be the key factors. I guess that's more of on the practicality end of it. But I think for a lot of Vietnamese women, well, not a lot, so that's very general, but I think for people, they really need more to discover their own country, because it's so beautiful. I mean, it really has some of the most incredible scenery riding in Asia. So I think that would be a key motivator for people to really take the time and travel in their backyard. And I think COVID's given that to people. You know, Vietnamese, the middle class is now growing and they spend a lot of money going abroad, but, you know, spend that money and really explore their own backyard, because it is absolutely fascinating and beautiful. So yeah, I think they'd be the main points. I could say a bit more, but I think that's sort of the main advice I would give, being a more kind of experienced rider. Yeah.
Nice. Very nice. Very nice ending. Thank you so much, Maeve. It was great chatting with you again, and thanks for making the time and sharing your experience of Vietnam. I didn't need to be convinced, but yeah, I hope more people will be attracted to this beautiful destination, and that one day we can also organize a trip there with you, and so that you can take us visit your Vietnam.
Absolutely, absolutely. And happy to help out with any questions anyone might have, you know, or advice. I'm more than happy to share anything with anyone. And then also, Alison, I mean, really look forward to maybe having you come back and ride sometime. Yeah, bike of your choice can easily be hired. There's plenty of different types of bikes for hire now in Hanoi. You can come here on an international motorbike license. So yeah, that would be absolutely incredible, and hopefully in the next few years, once we get through this pandemic, fingers crossed. Huh?
Definitely. Thank you so much, Maeve.
Okay. Bye. Ciao. Okay, bye. Thank you.